Good evening, my dear friends. Welcome to Life After Life Spirit Reports by Allan Kardec, based on the beautiful book Heaven and Hell. Welcome. We're meeting every Sunday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, airing from California for the past 3 months, approximately. And we have been studying the average spirits, which is the second category that Allan Kardec in the second part of Heaven and Hell covers. First, we talked about the happy spirits, and now we are concerning ourselves with the average spirits. Dear friends, let us celebrate today that we have this opportunity to meet thanks to this beautiful platform of Kardec Radio that allows us to meet in this intercontinental classroom. And we're also smitten with gratitude to Allan Kardec for his diligent work and committed work to provide this vital information for us that helps us in our inner transformation, helps us to prepare ourselves for our transition in our future lives, and helps us today to understand how we can improve ourselves. And of course, we are asking for heart-mind connection with our Mother, Father, God, our beloved Jesus, our Master, our guide and model. And we also thank the good spirits, the mentors of Kardec Radio in this group, for your support and guidance during this process of studying. And with this, we humbly ask for permission to start tonight's gathering and study group. And so be it. Hello, dear friends. Tony, welcome. Nice to see you. There's some other friends, but they haven't revealed themselves. Just know if I don't see your name or don't mention it, I am extremely delighted to have you. Welcome, everyone. So today, dear friends, we're going to focus on Mrs. Anna Belleville, who you can find on page 337 in Heaven and Hell. She's one of the average spirits. And let us look what she has to teach us tonight. It is a pretty long story, so we will be doing our best to get through it and cutting it a little bit short. So Anna Belleville was a young woman, and she passed away at the age of 35. She was lively, spiritual, and endowed with rare intelligence. She also died after a long and cruel illness. She possessed rectitude of judgment and eminent moral qualities. She was a wife and devoted mother. Now we're emphasizing she was a devoted mother, and moreover possessed an uncommon integrity of character and an expedient spirit that enabled her to never be caught off guard, even by the most challenging situation in her life. So we're kind of getting the picture that she was a pretty advanced spirit. She had pretty good moral qualities. Now let's see why she was categorized as an average spirit. Without harboring resentment towards individuals against whom she might have much to complain, she was always ready to help them when the occasion arose. Then she had an accident, and that allowed her to be bedfast for 3 years. Now let's just imagine that. Let us open our minds and hearts in particular to the situation of this 35-year-old young mother of 2, I believe, several children, who had an accident and was in bed for 3 years. And she was prey to the cruelest suffering. Heartbreaking, right? She firmly believed in the existence of the soul and the future life, but concerned herself little with the matter. All her thoughts were related to the present, which was very important to her, although she had no fear of death and did not seek material pleasures. Let us pause, dear friends, because we're reaching our first lesson. Teresa, nice to see you. Welcome, dear friend. And Lisa Tellis, thank you so much for joining as well. Yeah, so she says all her thoughts, Alan Kardec says, all her thoughts were related to the present. Now we may ask, what's wrong with that, Sunshine? Isn't the present moment all we have? Isn't that what we often read and hear in the New Age, so-called New Age movement, where we're always being reminded to just focus on the moment because all we have is the present moment, and that if we live anywhere else with our mind going into the past or in the future, that's not really living life, but rather than that we should be staying present and anchoring ourselves in our bodies, right? Now, in my humble opinion, there is some truth to that, what we're hearing in mainstream or let's say New Age methodology. But let us see, there is another picture there's a wider picture. And thanks to Spiritism and Alan Kardec and the spirits on high, we're getting a little bit of a wider perspective. And for that, we're going to the Gospel, chapter 2, My Kingdom is Not of This World. And we're going to page 62. And that is exciting because we're seeing a little bit of a different perspective. Why only focusing on the present may not serve us 100%. So here is under the explanations by Alan Kardec, the so-called point of view, where he says that corporeal life is no more than a passage. So that puts it already into perspective. And we're abbreviating the whole long chapter. We're picking up bits and pieces, and you're invited to read the whole chapter and really go more into detail. So the corporeal life is no more than a passage, and death is no longer anything terrifying for us. So then he says, due to the mere doubt regarding the future life, people direct all their thoughts towards the earthly life. Uncertain of the future, they give everything to the present. Aha, friends, here we go. This may have applied to our friend Anna. So when we have any doubts about what happens after our transition, our so-called death, a lot of people believe that there is nothing that awaits us. Other people think there is a place of heaven and a place of hell. And then there is a vast majority that is completely uncertain of what happens. Now, if we don't know where we're going, of course, we can only logically, it logically leads us to the place where we anchor ourselves and cling to the present moment and see that that is all there is to our lives, which, of course, you can guess that, makes us cling to matter, which allows us to be maybe more materialistically inclined than would serve us. So we are invited to open our minds on that. So uncertain of the future, which applies to many, maybe not us, they give everything to the present. By not foreseeing possessions that are more precious than those of earth, they are like children who can see nothing beyond their toys. There is nothing they will not do to obtain them. Right, friends? The short-term thinking, just in the moment. We all know little children in the sandbox fighting over toys, right? And the toy, not having the toy, is the end of their little worlds because they do not yet have the capacity to look beyond that toy and that particular moment. But we, friends, we do, right? And particularly because we are privy to Spiritism. So, there is nothing they will not do to obtain them. So they intentionally cause themselves true torment at every moment. So if we cling and only see the present moment, we're creating more pain for ourselves than necessary. Interesting, right? So then Alan Kardec invites us to see what actually shifts if we open our point of view to our future life, which we, as we gather tonight, may very well be aware of, that the kingdom, that Jesus' kingdom is not of this world, and that we do go into future lives and life after life. And here he teaches us that Spiritism broadens our thought and opens us up to new horizons. Instead of this narrow and small-minded view that concentrates on the present life, which makes the instant that one passes on the earth the unique and fragile pivot of the eternal future. Spiritism shows that this life is only one link in the harmonious and magnificent whole of the Creator's work. Once again, Spiritism and the spirits on high open up our scope. They see that this moment, this life, even just this whole life, is just one pearl in the pearl necklace. One pearl, one life in the whole string of lives. As I once read, that one lifetime is but a blink of an eye in the universal concept. So it is rather short, and we are invited tonight to take another look and open our minds and eyes and thoughts and hearts to a bigger perspective. Let us see. Spiritism also demonstrates the solidarity that interconnects all the existences of one being, all beings of the same world and all beings of all worlds. It thus provides a basis and a reason for universal fraternity, and that's a so-called fringe benefit. Now we're not opening up only our perspective, our visual, but we're also, as a result, opening up our hearts and become more fraternal. So friends, you may understand that only seeing the present moment does not serve us entirely. Then we have in the same chapter a Queen of France adding a little bit more to the subject. She says, in order to prepare oneself for a place in this kingdom, self-denial, humility, charity in all its heavenly forms, and benevolence towards all are required. So we're getting even a new layer. So not only do we not only focus on the present moment, but in order to prepare ourselves for the future and reach eventually the kingdom that Jesus promised to us, we need to foster denial, self-denial, humility, and charity in us. And benevolence, and we do know that benevolence, which is goodwill, is part of the definition of charity that we read in the Spirit's book, that we get offered in the Spirit's book. Then she says, you're not asked who you were or what position you occupied, but what good you did, the tears you wiped away. So again, if we cling to the present moment, that title, that position, that career might be so overly important that we don't see that doing good is so much more important. And then she finishes off by saying, have pity on those who have not gained the kingdom of heaven. Help them with your prayers, for prayer brings people closer to the Most High. It is the link of union between heaven and earth, and do not forget that. Remember, friends, last week we talked about prayer and the importance of that. And here again, we're invited to not forget prayer, but focus on prayer and pray. Pray for everything and everyone. So, let us move on and go back to Anna Belleville. Let's see what else she has to teach us. So, she wanted to live less for herself, but more for her children. Well, that sounds very noble, doesn't it? She knew they needed her, and that is what kept her clinging to life. It's a little bit linked to staying in the present moment, right? So her children were very important to her, and that kept her clinging to life. She understood Spiritism without having studied it deeply. She was interested in it, but could never manage to think in terms of the future. She could not think beyond the moment. Then one day, her time had come, and she was just about to transition when she realized that she didn't want to go. And she wanted to wait until her husband would come home because she had a message for him. And all of a sudden, her vital force came back, and she continued on for another several months. Her struggle between life and death was prolonged for 3 more months thereafter, a time that was nothing but long and painful agony. Now let's take a mental note. She was clinging to life. Her children were very important to her. And when her time had come, she resisted it. So let's just hold that thought, because we're going into that in just a little bit further to see why that did not serve her, because we will be finding an explanation for that. But in the meantime, we're fast forwarding to her first invocation, which was on the day after her death. And she just reported that she was no longer suffering and she was completely healed from her earthly ills, but that she needed help via prayers. So she asked everyone to please pray for her. But that was on the day she passed, so her perspective was quite narrow still. Then she was evoked 1 month later, and she thanked the prayers that were given her, that were provided to her, because they helped her along. And then she actually reported that she was suffering a lot. So she, in her first month after her passing, suffered. And she says, I myself prolonged my suffering at that time, meaning before she passed. Remember, it was her time, and because she wanted to hang around her children, she prolonged her earthly life. And she says that prolongation caused her more suffering. The ardent desire to live out of love for my children made me cling to matter. So you may ask now, or we may ask ourselves, well, but Sunshine, isn't our moment of death predestined? Isn't that infallible? And we do get the answer in the Spirit's book, and I think it's number 834 in the Spirit's book, where Alan Kardec asks exactly that question. Is there any way to change our day of expiration? And the answer is that our day of death is infallible. There's infallibility. So that means it is already fixed. So now why was she able to actually change it, right, friends? That is strange, and we will be getting help to get an answer for this question. She also, before we go there, said that she confidently abandoned herself, that she abandoned herself from the will of God by forcing herself to stay longer on earth to take care of her children. So she was not following God's will. And we know that we're always called to follow God's will, right? And that caused her more suffering. She says, but rather than looking forward towards the future that awaited me, I only saw the present that I would be leaving behind. Again, her clinging to the present moment and not seeing the bigger picture. Now let us fast forward to page 342, because St. Louis actually gives us a little bit more information on why she was able to prolong her time and what that actually meant. So the question that Alan Kardec asked, and he received the answer from St. Louis, is, can a person, through an effort of his or her own will, delay the moment of the soul's separation from the body? That's the question we have too, friends, right? I see Nora Brazil, Renata Casadei. Oh, dear friends, so lovely to see you. Sol Souza. Lovely. Thank you for joining us. So let us see. This is quite exciting, right? So is that possible? And St. Louis responds, to answer this question in the affirmative without any restrictions would lead to erroneous conclusions. So then he says, under certain conditions, an incarnate spirit may prolong its corporeal existence in order to finish giving what it regards as indispensable instructions. Such a right might be granted, as in this particular case of Anna, as well as in many others. This extension of life, however, can only be for a brief time. So we're learning that there are some exceptions, that actually if there is a specific instruction that still needs to be given, we have free will to prolong our life on earth, our time in our physical form, but only for a brief time. As a trial for the spirit, or in the interest of concluding a mission, failing organs may receive an infusion of the vital fluid, which will enable them to add a few moments to the physical manifestation of thought. So that is exactly what happened to Anna. She was ready to pass away, and her willpower was so strong that she did not want to. She clung to her body, and that's when her vitality came back. Of course, we know that that would not happen with every single person, but in this particular case, and we learn from St. Louis, there are some others, it worked. Now, also one must not see in this incident God's derogation from the immutability of the divine laws, but a consequence of the free will of the human soul, who at the final moment is aware of its mission and despite death wishes to accomplish what it has until now failed to do so. So what St. Louis tells us here, that this particular case does not annul, does not negate the divine law, which is what we mentioned earlier. Question 834, when the spirits told Allan Kardec that our time of our transition is actually already set. So it does not negate that, but there are some exceptions. As we say, there is always the exception to the rule, right? So sometimes this prolongation of vitality may, however, be a form of punishment inflicted on a spirit who doubts the future, and it will necessarily suffer because of it. And that is exactly what happened to our friend Anna. She doubted the future. She clung to her present time, present life, present moment. She wanted to take care. She clung to her children. She wanted to take care of her children a little bit longer. And she was able to do so through her willpower, because we all have free will. However, she caused herself more suffering. She did not surrender to God's will. And that is what she says. I prolonged my suffering because I did not surrender to God's will. So the invitation for us, or the lesson for us tonight, is to really take that to heart, that the most overriding desire we ought to have is always to align our will with God's will. It does not always serve us to, how should we say, to be an independent, to cut ourselves off from the whole. So that was St. Louis. Very interesting. So let us continue back. Let us go back to Anna, and let's see what else she's saying. She has another regret. So this is her first regret, that she clung too much to the future, that she didn't surrender to God's will, and that she actually created more pain for herself. But now she says, I attend your meetings quite often. And she's referring to the Parisian Spiritist Society back in the 19th century. And I listen to the counsels transmitted to you. If I could have understood them while on earth, my suffering would have been lessened. But the time had not yet come. You remember earlier she said that she was not interested in studying. She had a vague idea about Spiritism, and she just had a vague idea, but she was not interested in studying because she was clinging to the present moment. And here she says, if only I could have understood it better, because then my suffering would have lessened. And friends, we're reminded of Thought and Life by Emmanuel. A wonderful book. We have several study sessions. We find them, 2 of them, or at least one of them, on Kardec Radio. We're conducting one here in Northern California at Divine Light Spiritist Center for the last, I want to say, 9 months. And I see now there's also one in Washington, D.C., a phenomenal book, so helpful to help us guide ourselves, align ourselves, and see what is really important for our inner transformation. So when we go to chapter 4 in Thought and Life, which is labeled Instruction, Emmanuel teaches us that there are two wings for our how should we say, our transformation that are required. One is wisdom, the other one is love. So wisdom is really linked to our knowledge, more the intellectual knowledge, our studying, our intelligence, studying. We need that. And that is something Anna was lacking. But we also and equally need love, which is the service to others. It is our moral transformation, which is why we're here, friends, which is also why we're here. We're educating ourselves. We're actually doing both tonight and on Kardec Radio in general. Yes, we need both. We need to serve and we need to study. We need to study and we need to serve. And again, we need to serve and we need to study. We need to do both. And Anna missed that. Anna was not focused on the studying part. Now, on planet Earth in general, our intellect is way ahead of our moral development, right, friends? We see it every single day. We may even see it in ourselves. But that just emphasizes the importance for us to not forget. We need both. So then, during this invocation, Allan Kardec is asking her, could you provide us any information about the past you regret so much? Because she has regrets. And we're now also starting to understand why she is an average spirit, right, friends? She is an average spirit because she had some good parts, some evolved aspects of herself, and then some not so evolved ones. So she says, I'm ready to confess. It's cute. I'm ready to confess. I scorned someone else's suffering. I watched my mother suffer without showing her any compassion, and I regard her illness as imaginary. Friends, see, here is another lesson for us. It is important to always open our hearts towards the suffering, not only, but definitely also towards the suffering of others. And very much so towards our own parents, but also towards the universal parents, the universal family. Our family is larger than just our flesh family, but it starts with them, doesn't it, friends? So she did not have any compassion for her mother's suffering. And that is one of her big regrets. Empathy, charity, benevolence, right, friends? Always ready to serve. 6 months later, Anna was invoked again. And now we kind of see the progression. At first she was like relieved. She had passed on. Her suffering had lessened. Then a month later, she said, well, I'm quite suffering, and here is why. I have some regrets because I haven't studied. I've clung too much to the future. Now, 6 months later, let's see what she teaches us now. I bet her eyes have opened further. So now she describes her situation. Allan Kardec is asking, now that more time has passed since you left your material envelope, could you describe your situation and your occupation in the spirit world? Very good question. Allan Kardec is now wondering, so where are you at now? Let's see what happened and what are you actually doing? And the answer is, during my earthly life, I was what is commonly called a good person. But I prized my own welfare above anything else. Pause, friends. So she still had selfish aspects to herself. And we know through Spiritism, through Allan Kardec's and the Good Spirits information, and of course Jesus, above all of it, that we need to lessen our selfishness. We need to shed our selfishness and pride. We read in the Gospel according to Spiritism that selfishness and pride is the biggest antidote to charity. It makes it impossible for us to be charitable. So if we're self-absorbed and focusing on a small little circle, starting with us, and then maybe as far as our own family of the flesh is concerned, we're still operating a little bit under the umbrella of selfishness, which does not allow us to really feel love for our brothers and sisters. Love God above all else and your neighbors as yourself, which really means that if we love God, we cannot not love our neighbors, because loving our neighbors means loving God. Loving God's children means loving God. And if we don't love God's children, we obviously logically cannot love God. Right, friends? So she had some selfish aspects to herself. I was not capable of making too much of a sacrifice to ease another's misfortune. And she proved that because she was not even really capable of taking care of her mother when she was suffering. In the invisible world, now she teaches us, there are neither categories nor conditions other than personal merit. Here, the one who used to be good and charitable, though poor, is now above the one who used to be rich and who used to humiliate the poor with his alms. Very interesting lesson. Let us pause for a moment and let us sink in. What is she telling us? She's telling us that, again, in different words, clinging to the present moment, which means clinging to materialism, clinging to money, clinging to fame, status, clinging to all the vicissitudes of our material life. We know it very well, right, friends? If we just focus on that, at that very moment, we will actually fall behind those who have much less in terms of material goods in their lives, much less to show in their material lives, in our physical form, in their physical forms here on earth, but they've gained the merit that is actually putting them ahead of us, or ahead of those who have primarily focused on the material life. So the invitation tonight stands to recommit to charity, to recommit to service, to underemphasize rather than overemphasize our material situations, to not get down on ourselves if the promotion isn't coming, if our positions in our jobs are not what we're really wanting, if we don't have a good car or maybe don't own a home. All of this, friends, is less important than being of service, opening our hearts and helping others. Thank you, Anna, for giving us this great reminder tonight. My mission, she says now, is to console and encourage others, and in doing so, I am very happy. See, friends, already 3 months after or 6 months after her passing, she's learned the lesson. She understands that merit is what counts. Merit is the single most important thing. And now she's putting herself into the service of others. Beautiful, right? So then we go to the final summary that Alan Kardec gifts us with about Anna's case. And here, let us read it. It is in fine print, and if you would like to follow along, you can find it on page 343 in Heaven and Hell. And here we're reading. We might marvel at the relative quickness with which this spirit, Anna, engaged herself, given her attachment to corporeal life. Right, friends? We're a little bit surprised too. She was actually fairly quick in transitioning. Her perispirit did not seem to be very attached to her physical form any longer. She also learned her lessons pretty quick on the other side, right? So it was all pretty quick, but yet she lived so strongly in the present moment and was so attached to her corporeal life. How does that fit together? Let's see. The answer will come. However, we should realize that such attachment that she experienced had nothing material or sensual about it, but rather had its moral aspect, motivated as it was by the needs of her young children. Aha, very important. Let's take a mental note and a pause to allow this to sink in for us. So there's two types of attachments. Hers came from a moral aspect. Her desire, her attachment to her physical form in the moment, in the present moment, was because she wanted to take care of her children, which, dear friends, is different from our attachment to our physical form if it comes from purely materialistic inclinations. More money, more this, more that, and of course, our sensual inclinations. So she was on a different wavelength. Yes, she was attached, but her attachment was a moral attachment. Moreover, she was a spirit who was advanced in intelligence and morality, 1 degree higher, and she could have been among the happy spirits. See, she almost made it to the happy spirits, because remember, friends, she had a lot of good aspects to herself. She had a good heart, but she made still a few errors, and we might see ourselves in that, in Anna, right? Let us remember that these lessons are for us to reflect tonight and in the week to come, to reflect upon, to see where we can learn from Anna, so that we may perhaps end up as a happy spirit, right? We have the openness in our minds and hearts to study, so that puts us at an advantage potentially. So she says, Ellen Kardec says, her perispiritual links therefore lacked the attachment that would have resulted from a greater identification with matter. See, because her attachment to her physical form came from a moral perspective and not so much from a sensual material perspective, her perispiritual envelope was already detached, much more detached from her physical form. It didn't cause the same attachment as a sensual material attachment to the body would have caused, or a material and sensual attachment to her life would have caused. In fact, one could say that her life, debilitated by her long illness, was held together only by tenuous threads that she wanted to keep from breaking. Remember? It was her willpower. She clung to her physical form. And that was the reason why she was so long in her body. Nonetheless, her resistance was punished by an increase in her suffering from the illness itself and not from the difficulty of disengagement. Friends, do you remember in our previous sessions, there is actually, for those of you who are interested in the summary of the actual chapter, it's called, I think, The Transition, Here in Heaven and Hell. Please go to the entry to our class on August 25th. On Kardec Radio, you can go to the Facebook page and you will find the summary. And there we see the distinction of we're either attached very much to our physical form through our perispirit, which the perispirit always travels together with our soul, and that will cause us usually tremendous amount of suffering. But we can also not be attached, and that is when we dematerialize our lives. And that means that our actual transition will be much less painful and much quicker, because the molecules that attach us to our physical form are already decomposed. Now, in this particular case, again, we're reminded that her clinging was out of her own willpower and had a moral quality to it. And that's why her actually transition was quick, because all the molecules had already disengaged from her physical body. All the molecules of her perispirit had already disengaged. So thus, when her spirit finally did separate, her state of confusion was brief. And that is the other thing. that we've learned that the state of confusion depends on our moral development, on our educational condition, and on how much our perispirit is still attached to our physical form. And then in wrapping up, she says, a soul's progress in the spirit life is therefore a fact demonstrated by experience. Corporeal life is the practical application of such progress, the test of the spirit's resolutions, the crucible in which it purifies itself. So she's reminding us that yes, the spirit transforms itself further in the spirit world. And we've seen that, how quickly she's gotten her realizations about her lifetime, and how quickly she realized that being of service and helping others was what she needed to do to build up merit. But that we actually, in our corporeal life, that is when we practice, when we put the lessons we have garnered during our life between lives, that's when we put them into practice and actually purify ourselves. It is the purification through the flesh, through our physical form. Since the soul continues to progress after death, its fate cannot be irrevocably set, because the definitive setting of a spirit's fate is, as we have stated, a denial of progress. Since progress and a set fate cannot coexist at the same time, we must choose the one that is sanctioned both by the facts and by reason. I love Alan Kardec. He's so logical. So, in essence, we're always progressing, and the spirit, and during the spirit life, the life after our physical corporeal life, we still develop further. We learn. We transform. But the actual litmus test, for those of you who know that from chemistry, comes when we're back in our physical form, because then we need to practice it. And of course, we're having a handicap, that is our forgetfulness that God granted us. So friends, in wrapping up, because I know it was a big chapter and we kind of pushed it through, maybe a little bit too fast. But in summary, what did we learn? Let us for a moment just summarize the lessons that we received tonight, so we can take them into our night, into our intelligent sleep, into our week to come, into our prayers and meditation, to make the most of it. So we learned first of all that this average spirit by the name of Anna had a number of regrets. And that is typical for spirits who are not only happy spirits. And one of her regrets was that she focused too much on the present moment. And that was because she had a moral attachment to matter, namely her children. It was, however, not a material attachment or due to sensuality. She had a lack of capacity to surrender to God's will, which allowed her to suffer more. Mental note, we suffer less when we align our will with God's will. She had no interest in studying and understanding and practicing the Spiritist teachings, and that caused her more pain as well, because it did not allow her to see the bigger picture. It allowed her to get stuck in the present moment too much. She also still had some pretty selfish aspects. She prized her own welfare above others' concern, and she focused only on her nuclear family. As a matter of fact, not even her mother, but only her children. And on the other hand, she was a good person. She had moral qualities. She had an innate sense for the goodness. And she teaches us that the soul continues to progress even after death, but that the actual practicing and expunging of past wrongs happens only in the physical form. And she reminds us of the power of heartfelt prayer. Dear friends, so many precious lessons. So much to learn, every time we're learning more. It would be probably wonderful to make a list of all the lessons we've learned from the happy spirits of what to do, and the average spirits what to do, and how we can learn what not to do. So it's a twofold process. And this completes our study for tonight, and it completes our chapter of the average spirits. Next week, we will be embarking on the suffering spirits, and you will see that it will be a completely different ballgame. So much more to learn. And now I invite you, dear friends, for a moment to pray, as we know the importance of prayer, the importance of connecting with our Mother, Father, God, our supreme intelligence and first cause of all things. We know the importance to always, always connect with Jesus, our guide and model. And it is equally important to connect with all the other spirits on high, spirits, Jesus's phalanges that surround us day and night, that are working incessantly on planet Earth for our progress, to support us in our inner transformation. And of course, we have so much gratitude also to our own personal mentors, our own angels, that are with us from the moment of incarnation to the moment of excarnation, ready to stand by our side, whispering to us consoling and guiding messages. And we are filled with gratitude to Allan Kardec and this phalange of good spirits, giving us this pivotal and ever so important information that we allowing our hearts and minds to open to, so that we can learn, from those who have come before us of how to become better people and prepare ourselves for the kingdom of God, but also to learn of what not to do to prepare ourselves for the kingdom of God. We're praying that we will be capable in this week to come to renew our commitment to tuning ourselves into the Wi-Fi of God and our guide and model, beloved Jesus and the good spirits, so that we renew our commitment to allowing our will be guided by God's will. And lastly, we're praying for all those who couldn't make it tonight, and for those who are suffering, and for those who do not see, who do not have the gift of spiritism in their lives, the openness to connect with Jesus every single day. And we're praying for those souls to have the good spirits be on their side. And lastly, we're also praying for all those who are rich and famous on this planet and living a very materialistic, beautiful materialistic existence. And we're praying for Jesus to come to their side, to whisper messages of charity. And we're counting ourselves into this group, allowing ourselves to renew our commitment as well to charity, to be always of service. And with this, we humbly ask for permission to close tonight's study session. And so be it. Dear friends, thank you for staying with us. Thank you for attending this beautiful lesson. Thank you for learning alongside us. And so God willing, we will see you again next week, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Kardec Radio, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Much love to you all. God bless you. Good night, dear friends.